Gentlemen, here we go. 1 Samuel 27 and the first two verses of chapter 28. David is in a really rough place. Saul has chased him all over the countryside, and David and his 600 friends have decided the best thing they can do, and the only option that they have, is to head for the Philistine territory, see if they can't live out among the enemies of Israel, negotiate some sort of alliance, so Saul will no longer chase him. And it actually works. David finds himself in Philistine territory, living in a town called Ziklag. And in Ziklag, he and his 600 men and their wives and children live. And by day, whenever necessary, he goes out and does raiding parties into villages. This is the terrible, dark thing about this season of David's life. He annihilates the villages, takes their cattle, takes their hard-earned possessions to feed his 600 men, tells the Philistine king that he's raiding the enemies of the Philistines, and in actuality, he's raiding the enemies of Israel. This deception gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it gets out of control. It takes on a life of its own, and David finds himself eventually into a potential position with the Philistine king. But let's look at something here. This is what you and I need to see. How did David basically get off the rails and end up in a foreign country that worships foreign gods, who's doing nothing but annihilating innocent people day in and day out? What is that about? Well, the first thing that you and I need to be aware of is that you and I can get exhausted. And I mean that physically, spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically. You and I both know if we don't have the proper amount of rest and balance in our life, we're going to make poor decisions. That's where David is. David has been chased for so long, I think he's forgotten what it means to chase. He's being chased, but he never does chase. And this is one thing about God. God wants us to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. You and I need to be God chasers. We don't need to be running from any and everything in our life. Number two, David has forgotten. Forgotten what? Forgotten God's provision in his life when he needed it most. He's no longer relying on God. He's relying on chariots and horses, might and strength. Psalm 20, verse 7. David is now relying upon his own strength. Check out the first verse in chapter 27. It's interesting. David is making decisions based on the fact that he foresees Saul eventually killing him. You see, David has forgotten totally the promise of God for him to be the next king. He's not acting as though he's going to be the next king, nor is he's even going to be alive. David is acting as though he's dead. He's trusting in that which he sees, not which cannot be seen. And when you and I get into that situation, we are really, really limiting what it is we can be effective at. So how's it end up for him? Well, yeah, quote, he's safe, but he's offered a job by Achish, the Philistine. He's offered a job to be his bodyguard for life. Let me explain what that means in this passage. King David has been offered the position of bodyguard, the very position once filled by Goliath. See the irony here. David, who slew Goliath, who killed the bear, who worshiped the Lord, who tended the flocks of the Lord all day long, is now taking Goliath's position in a foreign land, worshiping foreign gods. How did he get there? The same way you and I get to those positions in life. Very slowly, very surely. Like a drip, drip, drip. He's walked away from God. Last thing I see about David, and you and I cannot afford to do this, he has cut himself off totally from his counselors. He does not have Samuel to speak into his life. He's dead. He does not have Abiathar the priest anywhere in this passage. You see no evidence of him praying on any level. And on top of all of that, he's not even listening to his own wife. Jonathan is a long way away from David, his best friend. So he's cut himself off from his counselors. And when you and I put all these things together, we end up getting spiritually burnt out, ineffective. Heavens are like brass. We can't hear God. We feel no leading, and we make really dumb decisions. No counselors, no rest, no trust, no remembrance of what God has done on our behalf, and we end up being bodyguards for a foreign king. Look at some of these areas, and as I explained in the handout with this video, identify those areas that maybe we need to rectify before they get worse, so we're not heading the wrong direction, we're headed in a godly direction. Be a God chaser this week, and stop being chased by the things of this world. Let's have a good one.